May 10th, 2008.
Oh man, oh that is violent.
In the small town of Picher, the streets are already quiet. They have been quiet for years. The businesses are shuttered, the houses sit empty, and the government has been paying people to leave. Because Picher is not an ordinary American town. It is one of the most contaminated places in the United States. A community surrounded by mountains of toxic mining waste, towering as high as 200 feet. A place the federal government had already decided could not be saved. And on this afternoon, a violent EF4 tornado is carving a path directly toward it. Winds of 175 miles an hour. A funnel that will grow to a mile wide. A 76-mile path of destruction that will kill 21 people across 2 states and finish off a dying town for good. This is the story of the day the storm came for America's Chernobyl. But to understand what the tornado destroyed, you have to understand what Picher was. Because long before the sky turned against it, this town had already been poisoned by the very thing that built it. In 1913, lead and zinc were discovered on land belonging to the Quapaw tribe in far northeastern Oklahoma. The deposits were staggeringly rich, and when Quapaw landowners refused to lease their ground to the mining companies, the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs simply declared them incompetent and signed the leases on their behalf. Within a few years, a boomtown had erupted over the mines. Picher exploded to a peak population of well over 10,000 people, with thousands of men working the tunnels below. And the Tar Creek district became the most lucrative lead and zinc field in the region. During the First World War, the ore pulled from beneath this one small corner of Oklahoma supplied roughly half the metal in America's bullets and shells, and it did so again in the Second. For a time, Picher didn't just exist. It helped America win its wars, but the industry that built the town was quietly destroying it. For decades, the companies extracted what they needed and dumped everything else on the surface. Millions of tons of crushed gray rock known as chat, laced with lead, zinc, and cadmium. The piles grew and grew until they stood like a mountain range over the flat Oklahoma landscape, and nobody understood what was sitting on their doorstep. Nobody knew it was poisoning them. When the mining finally ceased in the late 1960s, the pumps keeping the tunnels dry were shut off, and thousands of abandoned shafts slowly filled with contaminated water. By the late 1970s, that water was seeping to the surface, and Tar Creek turned orange, then a deep red that will last forever. Sinkholes began opening without warning over the honeycomb of empty mines. In 1983, the EPA designated Tar Creek a Superfund site, one of the most contaminated in the nation. Then came the number that changed everything. Testing revealed that roughly a third of the children in Picher had lead levels in their blood above the federal danger threshold, the kind of poisoning that causes irreversible neurological damage. And in 2006, an Army Corps of Engineers study delivered the final blow. The vast majority of the buildings in town, including the school, had been so severely undermined that they could collapse into the old tunnels at any moment. The government made its decision. The town had to go.
Ottawa County, plagued by heavy metal contamination and sinkholes that threaten area residents.
The Tar Creek area was named to the EPA's Superfund list almost 20 years ago.
A federal buyout was launched, and slowly, street by street, Picher emptied. By the spring of 2008, only a few hundred holdouts remained, living in a skeleton of a town in the middle of a federal disaster zone. And then the atmosphere decided to add one more catastrophe to the list. The 2008 tornado season had already been off to a ferocious start, and the morning of May 10th brought a setup forecasters dread. A deep trough was ejecting across the plains. A strong surface low was racing over the region, and warm, moist air was being squeezed between a dry line and a warm front right over northeastern Oklahoma and southwestern Missouri. High instability, powerful wind shear. The Storm Prediction Center drew a moderate risk over the area. The ingredients for violent, fast-moving tornadoes were all in place. In the late afternoon, a storm exploded upward off the dry line near the Kansas border and organized with alarming speed into a tornado. At 5:20 p.m., just inside the Oklahoma line, the tornado touched down. It intensified almost immediately, crossing Highway 59 and the Neosho River, tearing through mobile homes as it charged east. Warnings went out and sirens began to wail across Picher. The town had roughly 20 minutes. As the tornado entered the Tar Creek Superfund site, it did something no tornado in recorded history had ever done. It plowed directly into the chat piles and the funnel filled with pulverized mining waste. Millions of particles of lead and cadmium, thrown thousands of feet into the sky and scattered across the debris field downwind. The poison that had been slowly killing Picher for 50 years was now airborne inside an EF4 tornado. And then it hit the town.
There's a tornado right there.
Where?
Right there. You look at that, and then you get in that bathroom. See it? It is right there on the ground. You see it?
Yeah.
It is right there. It's on the ground.
The tornado cut a catastrophic path through roughly 20 blocks of southern Picher. Manufactured homes were shredded in seconds. Wood-framed houses that had stood for nearly a century were stripped down to their foundations. Cars were thrown across roads, and block after block of what remained of the town simply ceased to exist. Around 200 homes were damaged or destroyed. More than 150 people were injured in Picher alone, and 6 people were killed, all of them among the holdouts, who had stayed in the only hometown they had ever known. From young residents just starting their lives to an elderly woman who had lived through the boom years, the poisoning, and the buyouts, and had outlasted all of it until this one afternoon. But the tornado was not finished. It clipped the north side of Quapaw and began to weaken. And for a moment it looked like the worst was over. Then the storm played its ace. A smaller cell to the south was ingested by the dominant supercell, spinning up a second tornado, and the two circulations merged into a single, re-intensified monster nearly a mile wide as it crossed Interstate 44 and roared into Missouri. Northwest of the small community of Racine, homes lining Iris Road were flattened at EF4 intensity and swept into the surrounding fields. Motorists on State Route 43 were picked up and thrown. One vehicle carried more than half a mile. And at the intersection of Highway 43 and Iris Road stood a 21-year-old volunteer firefighter named Tyler Casey. He had been dispatched from Seneca as a storm spotter, and when he saw the tornado coming, he got out of his vehicle to warn a family parked at the roadside watching the sky. They got out in time. However, Tyler could not make it back. He was caught in the direct path and critically injured. 2 days later, at a hospital in Joplin, he passed away. He had spent his final healthy minutes making sure strangers escaped a tornado he did not survive. Along that stretch of Newton County, 14 people lost their lives and some 200 were seriously hurt. The tornado swept on past the north side of Neosho, spared the center of Granby, and slammed directly into the small town of Newtonia. Weakening but still deadly, it pushed into Berry County, where it lofted a mobile home into a stand of trees, killing the person sheltering inside.
And a car, another car just crushed, is on top of it. Also, you can see that the tree limbs have been debarked. That's because of the force, the intensity of the tornado. And let me just tell you, all of this damage, a good indication of what type of tornado tore through here.
And then, after 76 miles and an hour and a half on the ground, the funnel finally roped out over the countryside south of McDowell, Missouri. 21 people were dead. Around 350 were injured. It was the deadliest tornado to strike Oklahoma since the Bridge Creek and Moore disaster of 1999. And when investigators studied where the victims had died, they found a grim pattern. Nearly half had been in vehicles, and most of the rest in weakly built or manufactured homes. One more brutal reminder of just how deadly it is to ride out a tornado in a car or a mobile home. In the days that followed, the National Guard moved into the wreckage, and the Secretary of Homeland Security toured what was left of Picher. Standing in the ruins, he said the scene looked like a small nuclear bomb had gone off. Survey teams rated the tornado an EF4, with estimated peak winds of 175 miles an hour, and noted something remarkable in their report. Even the massive chat piles, mountains of rock 200 feet tall, had done nothing to slow the tornado down. And the EPA delivered one final piece of bad news. The storm had disturbed and scattered the lead-laced waste all over again, turning even the cleanup into a health hazard. For Picher, there was no coming back. Federal and state officials made their position clear. There would be no money to rebuild a town the government was already paying people to abandon. The tornado had simply accelerated the inevitable. The remaining buyout checks were cut, and one by one, the last holdouts drove away. On September 1st, 2009, the city government of Picher, Oklahoma ended its operations, and in the years that followed, the town was formally erased from the map. Demolition crews tore down what the tornado had not. One pharmacist famously refused to leave, keeping his shop open for whoever still needed him, the last business owner in a ghost town, and he stayed until his death in 2015. He was the last piece of Picher still standing. Today, the chat piles remain. In a full circle turn of history, it is the Quapaw tribe, the people whose land was taken to dig the mines in the first place, who now lead the cleanup, moving millions of tons of waste back into the ground it came from. A process experts say could take decades more to finish. The water in Tar Creek still runs orange. The wind still lifts gray dust off the piles. And where a town of more than 10,000 once stood, there is only overgrowth swallowing the foundations and the empty grid of streets. The story of Picher will forever be one of the great tragedies of American industrial history, a town that gave everything to the ground beneath it and was poisoned by what came back up. But in the end, it wasn't the lead or the sinkholes or the water that wrote the final chapter. It took the atmosphere 20 minutes to finish what industry had spent 50 years doing. The storm didn't really destroy Picher. It just made sure everyone could finally see what was already there. If you made it this far, thank you for being here. These stories take time to research, write, and edit, and every view, like, and comment helps keep them going. So if you want to see more documentaries like this, consider subscribing and leaving a like.